Hello, everyone. Like Sophia mentioned, we thank you so much for joining us this evening. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Noeli Perez. And before we begin, I would like to invite you all to visit our website after the presentation to learn about upcoming programs and events. Through our website, you also could sign up for to receive our e-newsletter, our weekly e-newsletter, to get reminders for our upcoming speaker meetings, free classes, and support groups, and local mental health resources, and any announcements. So now I would like to introduce you to our guest speaker this evening, Dr. Kathryn Keithley, educational psychologist. She provides children with psychoeducational and neuropsychological assessments to help them overcome various struggles and disabilities. Dr. Keithley is a licensed educational psychologist with a state certification in school psychology. She also holds a Doctor of Psychology in Clinical Psychology, as well as an MA in Counseling Psychology with a concentration in Educational Psychology. She specializes in IEE evaluations and enjoys helping families and school districts understand how to provide the best experience for their students. So thank you, Dr. Kathryn Keithley, for being here with us tonight. If you have any questions during the presentation, please wait for our Q&A break to raise your hand or put questions in the chat, and we will read them out loud. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I love to come on and get the word out there about how we can help our kids in the community. And I think the special education process can be really overwhelming for a lot of folks. And I've been doing it a long time. And whoops, I hear some background noise. I hear, sorry about that. And so even for me going through it, sometimes I learn a few new things with different cases. But tonight I'm just going to go over the special education basics. So I'm going to share my screen and my PowerPoint. There we go. So as Noeli said, I do educational evaluations, diagnosis, and I do some counseling too. I have kids that come to my office that I've seen for a long time and do counseling with them. And but mostly what I do is specialize in assessments. So whether that child has never been assessed before or needs to be assessed by the school district, or maybe has been assessed multiple times, and I need to come in and review things. But I started my career in the public sector, so working as a school psychologist for a district, and I did a lot of work in Redwood City, ran programs there, and now I went on my own about 10 years ago and do private practice. So some of the myths I think for special education that I hear is all low kids are special education kids, and that's not true. I think that we need to be really careful about who we call disabled and what that looks like. Another one is all struggling students should have a full evaluation. I think that is a big misconception because a lot of things actually can be done even before a full evaluation takes place. Placement in special ed will solve learning and behavioral problems. That necessarily isn't true either. So we really have to look at each child, their strengths and weaknesses, and how can we accommodate them. This is one I hear a lot about. Speech therapy is all about articulation, and articulation is how a child says something. So a lisp or an S problem is part of speech therapy, but there's a greater part of speech therapy, and that's language skills. So just about how we communicate with our peers, how we communicate with adults, how we use language in day-to-day life and in academics. behavior problems equal special education. I came across that a lot, and I think that what happens is parents really are just grasping at straws. And like I mentioned before, there's a few things that we can do before that, and I'll go over that. Every special ed student is eligible for the same service. So I know you guys have probably heard the term IEPs, or individual education plan. And that first word is so important because it's individualized. And that's where the assessment comes in. So that's so important because the assessment shows strengths and weaknesses. And then from both of those strengths and weaknesses, we can build an IEP that's helpful for those kiddos. So it says RSP, these are the people that are involved in special education. They determine eligibility. Eligibility for special education is based on an assessment, and then the team meets to review that assessment, and it's really a team collaboration on what that eligibility will be and what that looks like. If a parent writes a letter requesting SPED evaluation, they will receive it. The district actually has 15 days to respond to any written request. That starts the process, but that doesn't entitle parents to a special education assessment, and I have an outline to show that. It is easy to get an instructional assistant services on an IEP. That is not easy, and that's actually the last resort. That's the last thing that we want to do unless a student is compromised by a health condition or kind of severely hurts others or themselves. But an instructional assistance is one of the last things that we look at because we really want kids to function independently and build bridges for that. So oftentimes I get asked, what is the first thing to do if you have a concern? So I always tell people, and in fact, one of my requirements to even start the testing is to go get your child's eyes tested by an ophthalmologist. This is something different than is done when you go into the pediatrician's office. When you're in the pediatrician's office, quite frankly, they're only doing distance and they're not looking up close. So if your child is having trouble reading, we need to see what their eyesight is up close. It's basically to see that there's not a severe vision issue. So going to the ophthalmologist they look at the health of the eye and they do a really good exam. And oftentimes I see that kids really, they need a pair of glasses. Getting hearing tested by an audiologist is a really good idea. Some behavioral and educational concerns can be related to hearing. And so in my practice, I like to look at all of the health concerns before I look at actually going and doing the testing. Because when you do the testing, you're looking at very in-depth visual processing. So you want to make sure those tests are valid and also rule out any health concerns. And this has happened quite a few times to me in my practice that we need to take in consideration. The next thing to do is consult with a doctor to rule out any physical issues first, as I was saying, and really to kind of get the doctor's opinion too. They have rating scales that they can do there to get more information and different resources that they can connect you with outside of the school district. And consult with the teacher and school staff. It's really, really important to open up that line of communication with your teacher and the principal and the school staff that's there. Setting up a meeting with them, letting them know your concerns is a great first step, because sometimes they might not even be aware of what's going on at home, or maybe the child is going fairly well all day at school and they come home and they just are completely shot because they've had to hold it together all day. So getting those people involved in all of that is a great first step. So one of the first steps that they call it in the district is called a student study team. This is a general education function with a multidisciplinary team, and you can invite whoever you'd like. If you have somebody in your family that needs to go there to support you, to go and listen and to brainstorm about what a good support system and interventions can be done even before an assessment. So how you do this is you can just contact the teacher and say, hey, I'd like to set up a SST meeting, and they'll get everybody involved and schedule that out. And those notes actually are really helpful. When I evaluate kids, I always go back and kind of do more of a forensic examination on what happened before the child got to my office. Were there any SST meetings? What are people saying that are working with the child? So the documentation is really important. And I tell parents, keep a binder, of all of the documentation that you have going between the school, the pediatrician, things that you noticed in homework. Put it all in a binder, because then you're organized, you have everything right there. And then if things escalate, you have documentation to back up the history of what's happening with the student. So anybody can request that. So the difference kind of between a SST and a 504 plan, a lot of people ask me about 504 plans, and it was really made to provide accommodations and support to students with disabilities. So anything ranging from a child that has epilepsy that needs support, a child that maybe needs help walking, that doesn't need an IEP, but maybe needs some accommodations for that. It's in a different category than the SST. And sometimes those can be really helpful, and that's all you need to do. So here's some key features of the 504 plan. So the eligibility, they will look at if they have a physical or mental impairment. ADHD could also be an impairment. The purpose really aims to remove barriers of learning and provide students with the necessary accommodations to participate in general education. And then it's similar to an SST because it's a team of educators, parents that come to the table and come up with how can we best support this student, and then we document it. And another thing about 504s that's important is they're reviewed every year. Sometimes folks in the school district, they're getting all set up and they might not realize that, hey, this student's 504 meeting or needs to be reviewed in April of every year. So parents sometimes need to say something and bring it to staff's attention, like, I really want that 504 meeting so that we can review all of the accommodations. That's another great thing to put in that binder, because as students get older and go into colleges and getting accommodations for testing, everything needs to be documented, and it has to show that documentation has been over a period of time, that it just didn't happen with the student that's in high school. So that's another really important thing. But unlike IEP, which is part of IDEA, this 504 plan does not require the provision of special education services. So it's in a different realm, but still can be extremely helpful. Here's what it's the continuation of services. So here on the left side, you can see general education. And then as we call that the least restrictive environment. So special education has a law, and it's called least restrictive environment, and all of the services are geared towards giving a minimal amount of services to get the maximum out of the student. So we don't want to give an aid to a student that might need that. That's way down here on the other side. So say a student qualifies for a special education, they might have what we call RSP, or resource services, that they might get pulled out of class, or maybe they need to get pushed in resources into the classroom. And then another layer of further on the continuum is a special day class. Those SDC classes are only for kids that have IEPs that really need all day special education services, and they're not with their general education peers. They're only for students, they're only with students with IEPs, and they tend to group those from mild, moderate to severe. And then in some cases, students are placed out of the district because they might not have the services that the student needs within the district. And those could be a county day class or a private school or a residential placement. But that is down the road from the initial evaluation. And those would be considered most restrictive, and we would put an 8 over in most restrictive as well. So here's the process that I was talking about before. We call this child find. So the district has a responsibility to notice kids that might need special education services, child find. Then we talked about the SST, the student study team, or an adult or agency can send a letter for request. That all goes into the referral process. The referral is 15 days to respond by the special education department. They can either send a parent an assessment plan saying, yes, we really do agree we need to do this assessment, or they can say, no, based upon the information that you gave us, we do not think that a special education assessment is warranted, and they'll send you a prior written notice. So let's go down the left side. The parent assessment plan would be what the district is going to do. What kind of testing are they going to do? Are they going to do speech only testing? Do they need to do behavioral testing? Do they need to do cognitive testing? So those are all on a sheet of paper, and it should be clearly seen there. So then you can sign that and say, yes, I give my permission to evaluate, and then the evaluation starts. Or I've been in cases where some parents maybe back up here, the school really wants to do the assessment, but the parent does not. That's not usually the case. It's usually the case the other way around. So this prior written notice, so you can accept that decision, or kind of like an insurance claims, you can say, no, I really feel like this is warranted, and you can go back and dispute the evaluation. And typically the special ed department will do an evaluation, and then if you even disagree with that, there's something called an independent evaluation, or what was referenced earlier as an IEE, an independent educational evaluation. And I'm a part of a lot of those because I'm an independent practitioner, not a part of the school district. So I have a non-biased view. So if we're going to go the evaluation of the child, and the district accepts that, and you sign the assessment plan, then they'll set a date of an evaluation. After the evaluation is complete, I always tell parents to get a copy of it before you go into an IEP meeting, because IEP meetings there's a lot of information there, and it can be overwhelming. So even for me, I like to look at all of the documentation before I even go into a meeting, so I know what's going on within the meeting, and I can ask more appropriate questions. They review the assessment, and then they determine eligibility. And I'll talk about a little bit more about what those 13 disabling criteria are, but they determine eligibility under IDEA, and the psychologist or the speech therapist or the occupational therapist will determine that eligibility and say that the child is eligible. Then from there, they'll develop goals in the areas that are weak for the student. And then based upon those goals and objectives, services are made. So for example, if a student is having trouble with reading, then they might have a few reading goals, and then the services to accomplish those goals might be pull out or group support with the resource specialist at the school. And then it goes back to that determined placement, which I mentioned back up in here. So some kids will go immediately into a special day class because their needs are so severe, and or sometimes they need to go into a county class, but most of the time they just need some pull out or inclusion. Ineligible, the parent has a right to disagree. You can go back to kind of what I was talking about with the SST or general education functions. There's a lot that can be done there, or maybe a 504 plan. If the parent disagrees, they have the right to request an independent assessment. And then somebody like me would do the assessment and look back at all of the records, all of the assessments that have been done, and make a determination on eligibility or ineligibility. I've seen both. They can go to fair hearing, due process, so it can get a little bit hairy, and that's where folks come to me, or they might need to get an advocate because of all the different steps in special education, might need some support there. Does anybody have any questions at this time?
If you do have a question, you can use the raise hand feature, or you can type your question into the chat and I'll read it out loud. And I am also going to be putting the Spanish version of the slideshow in the chat right now. I'm sorry for not doing that earlier.
Great, I must have made things really clear in the special ed arena, even though it can be a pretty muddy thing to get through. Oftentimes we talk about the bell curve, the bell curve in special education and really anywhere is, most kids fall in this blue range. And when I'm looking at tests and talking about tests, those come in between standard scores, and those are average, 90 to 110. So most kids throughout the nation will fall into this area. Up above here in the red area are areas of superiority. Those might be really high IQ scores. Those might be GATE kids. Down here, when we see scores that are in the 60s and 70s, we compare those to kids that are in the average range, and then we can say those are areas of deficit. So when we're looking at assessments, that's kind of a quick overview of how some of that is determined and how placement can even be determined.
Dr. Katie, we do have two questions.
Okay.
The first one is, prior to IEP, are we as parents supposed to get a copy of the IEP, or do we as parents need to ask for it?
You always probably will have to ask for it. I think that staff working in the school district go through a lot of these, and so sometimes they're working up on them to the day before, but it is within your right to request that before the meeting. And even if you don't get it before the meeting and you get it the same day of the meeting, you can reschedule the meeting so you have time to look at it. And also, you don't have to sign anything. You can go to the meeting, you can get all of the paperwork, and then you can say, you know what, I'm going to take my time. I'm going to look over this. I'll get back to you.
Thank you. The second question is from someone who works with college students. How can they help them transition from high school services?
That's a really good question. So that binder that I was talking about is really important, because what you can do is you can go to the college and they have student services there, and you can say, hey, I've had these services before. Here is my assessment. This is what I'd like to get. And they have staff there that can help you navigate that. So I suggest whatever college they're going to, say it's Cabrillo, get that done ahead of time so you can be sure to have those accommodations when you start classes.
Thank you.
School psychologists interpret scores, collect data, from the IEP members and really determine eligibility. They're really the biggest player because they do the bulk of the assessment. And so what we're looking at is 13 disabling criteria: autism spectrum disorder. These are just some of them: other health impaired, speech and learning impairment, specific learning disability, orthopedic impaired, visual impairment, emotionally disturbed. So depending on what's going on with the student, they'll be looking at one of these. And we have intellectual disability that I don't have up there. And then for younger kids, there's different criteria, and those are called IFSPs, and those happen before the age of 3. And that's kind of a different part of it, but those you can get services before the child is 3. And then after the child turns 3, then it goes into the district's responsibility. So SPED services are that individual education plan designed for specific students. No child has the exact same services or the exact same time or the exact same goals, because it's based upon their specific strengths and weaknesses, which goes back to that assessment piece. Comorbidity may exist between disabilities. So that means one disability can overlap into another, and who's ever doing the assessment should point that out. Services determined by by IEP in accordance with district policy. So some SELPAs have their own policies, and so it's important to know kind of when you get to that step what some of the policies are, and you can ask that. And goals and accommodations are written for students' needs. And I always like to bring student strength into those as well. Do we have any questions thus far?
We do have a comment in the chat. In the Pajaro Valley Unified School District, they serve students 0 to 22. So we work with students on IFSP.
Great. Yep. I have a lot of information on my website. I've been on some other podcasts that dive into these subjects more, because each of these little slides probably could be their own slide. So I just went over it pretty quickly, but it is a complex and broad subject, special education is. There's a lot of nuances to it. And so if you want more information, you can check out my website and or email me with any questions. I hope this was helpful for everyone out there. And I definitely I cut my slides down, but went a little under time. Does anybody have any questions about any of the subjects that I touched on? Oh, good. So everybody is super well versed in special education now, and hopefully you have some tools underneath your belt after hearing this, and you can better help students that you work with or your child or family members go through this process.
Thank you so much, Dr. Katie. And just to reiterate, I will be sharing a copy of the slideshow when I upload the recording on our website. So that will be available to everyone. I know that some of those slides had really great graphs and some dense text information on it. So I'll be sure to include those. We do have a question. Is emotional disability the same as a mental health diagnosis?
No, it's not. Emotional disturbance is one of the more severe special education criteria that we look at. So a mental health, like let's take anxiety, for example, that probably if the anxiety was impacting the student to a high degree, that would go under other health impaired or OHI. We really save the emotional emotional disturbance or emotional that eligibility classification for students that are really, really severe, because they'll probably be with other students that are that severe. We have ED programs in districts for that.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, if there are no other questions, I want to thank you all again for joining. I hope you have a great evening. And yes, please do reach out to NAMI Santa Cruz County or Dr. Keithley if you need any additional support. We would be happy to connect with you.
Thanks so much for having me. I really appreciate it. And I hope this makes things clearer for everybody out there in our community.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.